which I took my training very seriously, obviously, and I went really deep in training. After year one, to be honest, progress was remarkable. The scholarship grant went up, and we won game after game. In year two, when the confirmation of my development was sought for, things went wrong. Despite stretching sessions, despite adapted weightlifting exercises, etc., I struggled from a sustained lower back injury. After visits to several doctors and therapists, I contacted an osteopath in my home area, and after several sessions of therapy on both muscles and spinal cord, pain went away. The maintenance care afterwards ensured a further development in my sports career, which I then gave up due to my very first baby steps into politics, and here I am today. Now, although a while ago now, I remember the difficulties then set out by a young osteopath I met. He just started up his own business. And while having done studies just like anyone else, the fact that his profession was not fully recognized in Belgium clearly was a point of frustration for him. While physical therapists could be prescribed by a doctor, and thus the costs refunded by my health insurance, this was not the case for the osteopath, something which he found quite just simply not right. And I remember it also surprised me a bit that when speaking of my successful therapy to family and friends, they looked at me as if I had been consulting a medicine man, someone half god, half person, a type of shaman-like person. And both legally and mentally, it has always struck me that osteopathy fails to get the recognition it actually already has among so many young people, elderly people, athletes, everyone, basically. Not only of my work, of my friend and colleague MP Nathalie Muilen in the Belgian Federal Chamber, which she is doing for the osteopathic care sector, but also because of this personal experience, I feel really very happy to host you today in the European Parliament. Dear colleagues, dear friends, before giving the floor to the actual specialists in the field, I want to underline the two objectives of this afternoon's meeting. Firstly, as European lawmakers, I think we ought to pay attention to the fact that EFO and FORE have recently developed a SEN standard for osteopathic education and practice across Europe. The purpose of this meeting is to bring also my colleagues the story of the SEN standard for education and practice, and to find inspiration for the next steps that need to be set. Secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, I consider this meeting as a highly needed starting point. A starting point for the European story of osteopathic care to be told across Europe, but also a starting point for potential further initiatives around osteopathic care here in this European Parliament. And what better way is there to fill in this starting point by showing you this afternoon real-life examples of how much value osteopathy can offer to the citizens of Europe when osteopaths are properly trained and regulated and work in tandem with other medical and healthcare practitioners in an integrated healthcare environment. What better way is there to let people see for themselves what is already out there and has been out there for a very long time already, actually, in Europe today? What better way is there to wish you a thoughtful and inspiration-rich afternoon, and to thank the organizers as well for the good cooperation in setting up this event. Thank you for your attention. I gladly pass on back the floor to Jonathan Tellett for the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the European Federation of Osteopaths and the Forum for Osteopathic Regulation in Europe and the osteopathic community, we are gathered here today to officially recognise the launch of the first pan-European standard in osteopathy, recognised by the Comité Européen de Normalisation, also known as SEN. I think before we carry on, there's quite a few of us up here, so I thought we would just quickly introduce ourselves before I carry on. So if we start from the far end here, go Jen, please.
My name is Gert Goede. I'm from FOR. I'm the elected chair for. Everybody can hear me? So presumably for microphone there. Thank you. And I'm here as one of the two contributors to the SEN document.
My name is James Booth. I'm an osteopath working at the Queen's Medical Centre spinal unit in England, and I'm here to present some of our data from the ongoing research programme that we've been carrying out for the past 5 years.
My name is Jonathan Tayledge. I am an osteopath, past president of the European Federation of Osteopaths, and I was also the chair of
name is Marika Jabrat. I'm an osteopath. I come from Sweden, but I'm the present chair of EFO.
My name is Tim Walker. I'm the Chief Executive of the Osteopathy Regulator in the UK, and I'm sitting on the platform, I think, representing the drafting committee for the document. I'm not an osteopath, but I can write quite well.
Thank you very much, Tim. Okay, so just a little bit of background. Since osteopathy was founded back in 1874 by Dr. Andrew Taylor Still, osteopathic education, practice, and regulation has varied across the world, with only a few fortunate osteopaths benefiting from statutory regulation in their own country. It is hoped that the EN standard will provide a foundation for osteopathy across national boundaries and issues by setting the very highest possible standards of education and practice. In countries where osteopathy is not already regulated, it will act as a fence against those claiming to be osteopaths who have undertaken minimal training, which is currently a real risk to patients in many member states. It provides a structure to promote a profession that takes patient protection seriously and commits itself to the delivery of excellent standards of patient care and safety. It also aims to ensure that osteopathy cannot be damaged by those who would use it to promote their own self-interest. The EN standard is essential for the future well-being of osteopathic patients in Europe and provides a benchmark for those outside the Union to aspire to. Thanks now to the development of this standard, European osteopaths, patients, and departments of health will now start to benefit from its inception. Tom touched a little bit about what osteopaths do, but for the uninitiated, the practice of osteopathy uses medical, osteopathic, and scientific knowledge and principles. Osteopaths analyse and evaluate the functional processes of the patient and use this medical knowledge and these recognised principles in the individual diagnosis and treatment of the patient. The aim of osteopathy is to improve and support improved quality of life and independent function by relieving pain and improving musculoskeletal mobility. Osteopathic treatment can be preventative, curative, or adjuvant, meaning working alongside our medical colleagues. The osteopathic approach to healthcare is patient-centred and focused on the patient's health rather than disease-centred. Scientific rigour and evidence-informed practice are an important part of patient treatment and case management. Osteopaths use manual contact to identify and evaluate movement in all structural and functional aspects of the patient, identifying alterations of function and movement that impede health and then addressing them. The increased global recognition of osteopathy is already allowing osteopaths to work alongside our medical colleagues in areas such as the sporting arena, spinal units in hospitals, paediatric departments, and the like. For example, many osteopaths formed part of the medical teams involved in the care of athletes at the recent Olympic Games in Rio. In fact, we even had one of our own taking part, and we're very fortunate here to have today Mr. John Doman, who was the captain of the Olympic silver medal winning hockey team from Belgium, and is also a final year student at ULB here in Brussels. We have also invited today Mr. James Booth, a registered osteopath working in a spinal unit at at a leading hospital in the UK, alongside surgeons and other healthcare professionals. Later on, James will be taking us through some remarkable observations and developments that patients have benefited from thanks to osteopathic progress. In a moment, I will leave the floor to my friend and colleague, Mr. Gertjan Gurda, who will take you through exactly how we went about developing this standard. But before I do, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Tom and also Mr. Eric Dobbelaar for helping organise and sponsoring this event for today. Okay, I think I've spoken enough. So without further ado,
I'd like to make some changes to what you said. We have another osteopath in our midst who went to Rio and was there the osteopath of the Spanish sailing team, as I'm rightly informed, which is Luis Horta. Thank you for being here.
I didn't know. Well, you kept it quiet. Very good. Okay, so without further ado, Mr. Gertjan Jr.
Yes. All of you who know me a little bit know I'm always a little bit different. And I do things a little bit different, and because of my poor eyesight, I can read the screen over there, so I'll be standing over here. You can all hear me if I'm standing over here, I hope. I think my voice is loud enough. So it's much more easier for me to see the screen. If it works. Yes, oh, it's back. First, I'd like to tell a little bit about EFO. Most of you will know about EFO, but it's a European Federation of Osteopaths, which is recognized by the EU as the Osteopathic Professional Association. It has member organizations in 16 European countries, representing almost or more or less 10,000 osteopaths throughout Europe, from the north to the south of Europe. And its activity is mainly focused on lobbying, national mediation and representation. The other organization, which I'm the chair of, is FOR. And what we do, we try and seek to enhance protection of patients in Europe by promoting wider recognition and high standards in osteopathic treatment. Reasons why we wanted the standard. Our members are all across Europe, including competent authorities, voluntary registers and associations. I will come to that later. And we are, as an organization, member of Crossing Borders project. Of course, when you want to start up a document with all osteopaths, you have challenges. We all have challenges. You can rephrase them in other words if you like, but there is a disparate educational standards. Nobody agreed on what the education of an osteopath should look like. We have lack of credible evidence, and I hope Mr. Booth will tell us later on a little bit more, so we have a little piece more of evidence of what we are doing and whether or not it works. Our title of osteopath is not everywhere protected. So there are countries everybody can call himself an osteopath, put a sign on the door, say I'm an osteopath, and perform some treatments. Whether or not he's qualified, whether or not he had the right education, just put on the sign and your patients or victims walk in. I hope they walk out as well. Lack of funding, because money is always a problem, everywhere. When we wanted this document, we set out to identify our aims and opportunities. And one of our aims was to initiate a complete a SEND project and establish standards for training and practice in the different countries all over Europe. Just because of the fact every country has its own law, has its own way of educating osteopaths, and they're all saying, well, our osteopaths are the best. Work with other osteopathic organizations to identify the appropriate research streams. Because of research is expensive, every country can't pay it on their own. If we put our efforts together, we have more funds and we can finance more extensive or more interesting research fields.
develop an evidence base to lobby at European level for the recognition and regulation of osteopathy within the member states, with a view for osteopathy to be made available to European citizens throughout national health service provisions. Well, that's a whole sentence. I said it without breathing. What it means is, if we have better evidence for what we do and that osteopathy works, we can use that to make sure all the citizens in Europe will have, well, availability, will have the possibility to go to an osteopath. That's what it basically says. And we can use it probably, mainly, probably, to do some lobbying. Of course, there are always barriers. You always meet barriers, no matter what you do. For instance, we have no clear identity for osteopathic profession within the individual countries. I've said this before. We have to resolve this. This can't go on like this. So that's what we thought, what can we do about it? We have inconsistency of training and qualifications. Again, like I said, every country, every school even, has its own standards. Lack of critical mass of osteopaths. Well, we have some osteopaths, but if you look at the broader picture all over Europe, it's not enough. We're not enough to cause a ripple in the ocean. So the more osteopaths are educated to a good level, qualify, the more influence we can have as a group. And of course, there's always opposition to osteopathy as an autonomous healthcare profession. And the last, which probably has to do with the latter, is lack of political will. That's why we're here, I think, in the center of Europe, where all the politicians most of the time meet. This is where we should start. Just like you said, this is a good starting point for getting on, for going on the next level. So what do you do if you want to achieve something on European level? You can try to do it on your own, but luckily enough, there is an institution or a committee who helps you with drawing up a document with a European standard, which is called CEN. And it's French, it's Comité Européen de Normalisation. If you translate it, European Translation Organization. It made up standard bodies from the EU and EFTA, and is recognized by the European Commission as a competent authority for development of standards. Well, that's the one we had to go to. That's what we did. But what is a standard? If you have one, if you achieve getting a standard, what does it do? Well, it's a well-known product in the process area. For instance, if you manufacture something, it could be made to a standard, specific standard. And it's a key part of the single European market. For instance, if you want to buy a television set of the greatest quality you can have, for instance, Philips from Holland, and you want to buy a television set with the same quality in Portugal, it's manufactured to the same specifications what it is in Holland as in Portugal, as long as it has the CE mark on it. We see in Europe there is more moving into services, including healthcare. For instance, the aesthetic surgeons made their own CEN standards, and the chiropractors. Actually, they beat us because they were faster or earlier than us as osteopaths to start a CE document. They passed it. Unfortunately, they are not agreeing how what's written in it should be explained and how it should work. So as far as I know, for the last time I've spoken to someone from the chiropractic fields, they say, well, it's just at the bottom of a shelf and actually you're doing not that much with it, unfortunately. And the standard is developed according to a defined process. However important it is, it does not override national legislation. It provides a standard in those countries where there is no legislation, and therefore it's called a soft law. What is the purpose of the standard? And I think this is the most important slide of the whole series, because for me as a regulator, it's all about patient safety. It's not about making more money, it's not about having another shield on your door, it's not about, well, what do I know? It's all about patient safety. And that's what we should look at, because we are working with real life patients. And sometimes things can go wrong. And to ensure that we give our patients the best care we can and the most safest care we can, we tried it in a sense then. By improving the standard of patient care across Europe, we raise the awareness and the safetiness of what we're doing. We want it to become an indicative standard across Europe, so every member state should use it. It promotes a greater consensus in the profession, because if the schools adopt the document, most of the time, some schools are already at that level, but at least the graduates have a certain level which to some extent will guarantee that they're working safe. It strengthens the profession internally and externally. Well, if we speak with one mouth, if we speak with the same voice, it's easier to lobby, it's easier to get things done. And it's improvement on the status quo, because in countries where maybe there are some troubles, they don't see eye to eye, you can use the standards and say, well, if we sign up to this document, at least we have something we agree on. And it can be a starting point to work together. Well, how did we do it? Or how did the Austrian Standards Institute did this? They helped us. For instance, it was funded, the whole process, by EFO and 4, which is Jonathan was the former chair, and now is Marika. And the name of the standard is European Standard on Osteopathic Healthcare Provision. The secretariat was with the Austrian Standards Institute. And why did we pick them? Because they were the secretariat of the chiropractors. And we thought, rightfully, they had some experience and we could benefit from it. The work conducted by the technical body 414, made up by national delegations from SEN members. Every country has its own committee where is a delegate who goes to the central meetings, and there we drew up papers, and the papers were presented and rearranged and rewritten by the drafting group. And I really should say that the drafting group did the majority of the work. Every time amendments came on, and the drafting group had to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And I'd like to thank the drafting group, and I can't thank them enough for doing their job in this way. Without the drafting group, we would not have had this document. So Tim, you as member of the drafting committee, thank you very much for the work you've done. And all the others who were involved. I believe Alex was involved. Anyone else here who was involved? I don't know. Oh, yes. Sorry, Tim, you're there. So, thank you very much. Well, this is quite small. That's why I wear glasses. About the voting, just a little bit. The interesting thing about the voting was 18 countries voted in favor of the SEN document. 18. 14 abstained. And there was only one vote in whole Europe who was against. It was Bulgaria. So I'd say that's a pretty big success for what we've done. And I say that's a pretty big success for the drafting group to come up with such wording and such a document that most of the European countries would agree on this. Well, what's in the standard? I'll go over that fast. It includes a foreword, introduction, a scope, terms and definitions, and description of osteopathy. The last thing is actually for me very important, because that defines what an osteopath is. And not everybody agrees on what an osteopath should look like. And I don't mean the outside, but when he's graduated. Well, there are two pillars. We have a clinical practice, which contains case history, examination, osteopathic diagnosis, treatment, osteopathic profession, conducting professional development, and quality management system. And there is the education and training pillar. Well, it's essential competencies for osteopathic practice, core competencies for osteopathic education, and osteopathic teaching, learning, and assessment. This was quite important. Initially, this was a small part in the document. Luckily, there was a third party coming in, and which I should thank Ocean for. Ocean did some extensive work on working out all the education program. They even came up with a program where they could evaluate the schools and see whether or not they met the criteria of the SEN document. So, Ocean, Raymond, thank you very much for the work you and your organization has done. Thank you. How could the SEN document be used? Because, well, we have a document now. What to do with it? Just put it on the shelf like the chiropractors did, or not? I think the biggest challenge is now. Drawing up the document, well, I think in hindsight was fairly easy. But now we have to figure out how to make best use of the document. And I think that's most of the work, and it still needs to be done. I think one of the major challenges is accompanied with this is that we have two separate organizations, which makes it on European level a little bit different. So I'd like to speak out in favor. If the two organizations can join together, it will be much easier to use the standards because you're speaking with one voice. Thank you. And thank you. Well, it could be used by individual practitioners or clinics. They could say, well, look at me, look at us, I fulfill the SEN criteria. So we must have some kind of level. It could be used by educational institutes, for instance, Ocean, what they did. It could be used by schools who are not member of Ocean, but still want to keep or come to the level which is described in the SEN document. Associations in non-regulated countries. If you have a non-regulated country, every school can do whatever they want, and they can call themselves osteopath. If you have a SEN document and you decide to agree on what's written in it, the schools, you are sure, deliver osteopath with a certain level of education and training. It helps to draw public attention that the osteopathy is going to a higher standard. It could develop patient-public information about the standards in osteopathic care in Europe. And actually, if you look over there, there are some leaflets which we developed in cooperation with EFO, where actually is written down what a patient can expect from his osteopath, and also, in short, what the SEN document contains, what it's all about. Well, it could be a guidance for regulators, because there are certain things written in the document they can use to set the standard, and a lobbying at national EU level. And again, we should start here. This is the center of the EU. I'd like to thank you all for your attention. If you have any further questions or information, you can ask for Marika or you can ask for me. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gertjan. I think what we're going to do now is we're going to move straight on to the second presentation by Mr. James Booth, and then we have plenty of time for questions afterwards. So hopefully if you do have any questions on what Gertjan has just presented on, or on what James is about to present on, please note them down. We have plenty of time thereafter. Thank you. And so, James.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. It's a great pleasure to be here. As I said earlier, my name is James Booth. I'm a spinal osteopath working at the Centre for Spinal Studies and Surgery at the Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham. So the Queen's Medical Centre is one of Europe's largest teaching hospitals. We have within our own unit 14 dedicated spinal surgeons who do nothing but operate on spines all day. Within our department, we will see in excess of 8,000 spinal consultations in the year. And for a spinal unit that deals specifically with, interestingly, in excess of 80% of the patients who are referred to our unit do not or cannot have spinal surgery. This leaves a vast number of people who require conservative management of their pain. The conservative team within the spinal unit consists of physiotherapists, orthotists, osteopaths, specialist nurse practitioners, pain management consultants, and dedicated radiologists. The osteopathic service within the Queen's Medical Centre was established in 1999, and it was designed specifically to offer innovative treatment for patients who require management for chronic spinal pain. The osteopathic service now sees approximately 1,500 appointments per year. So the patients who we see within our departments as osteopaths are all, by whatever definition you can usually use. Some would say 3 months, some would say 6 months. All of our patients are chronic and have had back pain for more than a year at the very least. The patient referrals that we receive are all what are known as tertiary referrals, which means these patients are sent to us by colleagues within the hospital. So a GP would refer the patients into the spinal unit for an expert's opinion. They would be triaged, and following that triage, they would be referred on to us if it were felt appropriate. All of the patients, or a vast majority of the patients, have received intensive investigation. We know from our data that over 75% of the patients we see have already had MRI, CT, X-ray, blood tests, and the like, which obviously has cost implications. The majority of these patients have already had multiple interventions. They've tried community-based care, whether it be physiotherapy, pain management, osteopathy and chiropractic, and often they'll have had other secondary care like surgery or pain management. Many of the patients have coexisting morbidities. These are problems related both to their spinal condition or to the long-term pain medication that they've had to take as a result of their spinal condition, or because they have other comorbidities. And as I said before, many of these patients are taking significant amounts of medication. In terms of what we do as osteopaths within the spinal unit, we work autonomously. This is an important point to make. We work independently, so although we receive our referrals from colleagues, they are referred to us for our own opinion and for treatment as we see fit for those patients. We carry out a combination of treatments. We provide osteopathic manipulation. We're also involved in triaging patients who are referred into the service as a primary care triage. We're involved in regular weekly MDT meetings, multidisciplinary team meetings, alongside radiologists, spinal surgeons and pain consultants, trying to devise best treatment strategies for these patients. We independently carry out diagnostic spinal injections, including facet joint injections and sacroiliac joint block. We're involved in regular training and education of both surgical and non-surgical colleagues, and as you'll see from the data I'm about to present, we're also involved in research. The data collection program that we use is known as Spine Tango and was developed as a unique data collection program originally for spine surgeons. It was developed in collaboration between University of Bern in Switzerland and Eurospine. Since its inception, over 30,000 interventions, spine surgery interventions, have been recorded on the spinal registry. In 2009, Spine Tango Conservative was developed, and this was a conservative data collection tool used to capture data from patients who are receiving conservative care. And I'm pleased to say that the osteopathic team at the Queen's Medical Centre are the first to record and input data onto the registry. So what kind of data do we collect? Well, we collect profiling data so we can understand the types of patients who are being sent to us. This data includes history of treatment, the history of the back complaint, the medication the patient takes, their comorbidities, as well as any spinal surgery. We also record functional and diagnostic data using international classifications for diagnosis and functional disability. The functional limitations become the goals of treatment. We use an important data collection tool called the EQ5D, the Eurocall 5-dimension, which helps to measure quality of life and is an important tool for calculating cost utility using the quality added life year mechanism. We use a core outcome measures index, which is a patient questionnaire, patient recorded outcome measure, which can capture data such as patient satisfaction, as well as pain, function, symptom-specific well-being, quality of life, and disability. And then finally, we also capture data using the Oswestry Disability and Neck Disability Index questionnaires, which measure functional disability resulting from spinal pain. And importantly, these are data tools that are used by surgical and non-surgical colleagues dealing with spines, so it allows us to draw comparative data. So as you can see, we collect quite a lot of data from our patients. So what is the advantage of collecting all this information? Well, it helps us to establish cost-benefit analysis, which is important and becoming increasingly important in the healthcare sector in which we work. It helps us to establish clinical effectiveness, which is also very important. Something that was touched on earlier, we can record complication safety data. And this is something that is becoming increasingly important in in a world where complication is a significant factor in spinal conditions. Our spine surgery colleagues have the highest premiums on their private medical insurance and indemnity insurance because they're dealing with a complex area. It allows us to define best practice within the specific clinical context in which we work. It causes us to reflect on what we do, and we have to hold what we're doing up to the light and examine it carefully and make sure that we are effective both for our patients and for the people who are paying for the treatment. Having this sort of data allows us to engage with the scientific community. We've already published 3 papers in high-profile scientific journals. And finally, it allows for cross-professional understanding, which is also important that we're able to speak with common language to people who are interested in what we do. So if we look specifically at the data, I'll just give you a sample of some of the data that we collect. VNS is the visual numerical score, which is a pain scale from 0 to 10. We record the data for patients when they come into the service, at the midpoint in treatment and the end of treatment. A reduction of 2 points or more would be classified as a minimal clinically important difference, which in other words means that the treatment has had an effect which the patient recognises has significantly improved their life. As you can see from the graphs that I can show you there, the categories with a score from 5 and upwards, all of those patients achieve a minimal clinically important difference. And overall, over 50% of our patients achieve a 50% or greater reduction in their pain following treatment. These are patients who have failed all of the treatments in the community, not just people with simple lower back pain. When we look at the scores for neck pain as well, 53% of our patients will achieve a greater than 50% reduction in their pain. When we look specifically at leg pain, the figures are even more impressive. A score of over 3 up to 10, these patients will achieve a minimal clinically important difference. And this is significant cost implications because very often people with spinal conditions referred into a spinal unit, their primary concern is their leg pain or arm pain associated with a spinal condition, and they end up having surgery to decompress the spine, or they have spinal injections which are costly interventions which carry high risks, and we can demonstrate through our data that we're able to help well over 50% of these patients in a significant way. When we look at COMI, the Core Outcome Measures Index, as I said, this is used to assess the main outcomes of importance to patients looking at their back pain, and it measures a combination of parameters including pain, function, symptom-specific well-being, quality of life and disability. And you can see on the graph there, the light blue area are the patients who achieve a 2 to 5 point reduction, 2 being the minimal clinically important difference, and above 5. So you can see, again, over 50% of our patients are achieving a minimal clinically important difference from our treatments using those parameters to measure improvement. Again, when we look at medication data, this is important both in terms of cost to the providers, but also comorbidities. And of the patients who are taking pain medication related to their specific spinal condition, 59% will either completely discontinue or significantly reduce the medication they take for their condition. And these are patients who are taking morphine and strong painkillers, anticonvulsants, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. They're not taking paracetamol for their pain. They're chronic back pain sufferers. Satisfaction data is equally important, particularly for commissioners. People who commission and pay for the services are very interested in how satisfied patients are with the care that they receive. And when we look at the outcomes for our lower back pain patients, 94% of them independently record their outcomes being very satisfied with treatment. And when we look at the same measure for neck pain, it's 89%. So we're doing well for our patients and they recognise that they are benefiting from treatment. And then, as I mentioned before, EQ5D, which is a very important tool for measuring health-related quality of life. It's a tool that is used across all healthcare sectors and is considered to be a primary measure by healthcare providers. It allows us to measure both clinical and economic appraisals, and it measures 5 dimensions of quality of life, including mobility, self-care, usual activities, pain, and anxiety and depression. The lower the score, the poorer the health-related quality of life. And as you can see in the box, the patients to the far left-hand side, their scores are so low, in other words, their quality of life is so low, it's dropped into negative figures. And actually, these are the patients who do best, who respond best to osteopathic treatment within our service. This clearly demonstrates that we are able to help these patients with the lowest quality of life scores resulting from their back pain. And interestingly, uniquely for our service compared with other conservative care, patients who have very poor anxiety and depression scores do as well with treatment as patients who don't. When we're cross-comparing our data with our surgical colleagues, we've taken some EQ5D scores from patients who've received total disc replacement or fusion surgery for their lower back pain, and we've cross-matched our baseline scores so that they're comparable with the surgical patients, and we can see that at baseline we have roughly the same scores in the comparable group. Post-intervention, we compare very favourably with patients who have received total disc replacement or fusion surgery. So we know that we compare favourably against patients who are receiving spinal surgery. As I say, we've published 3 times so far in high-profile spinal journals, including the European Spine Journal and Spine. This is a comment which was made by our lead surgeon, Mr. Bronik Boschek, who's a consultant neurosurgeon and spinal surgeon, but is also the editor of the European Spine Journal and sits on a lot of bodies who oversee management of chronic low back pain. Is that readable for everybody? I know it's quite small. Bronik says, having osteopaths in the team has offered us a different approach to working with patients with chronic and complex spinal pain. We value their input in the team. The osteopaths who have worked in the team have all been highly professional, skilled at recognising when to refer on to others in the team, and have provided high-quality care to our patients. The work that the osteopathic team carries out is important, is supported by a robust clinical audit, which has demonstrated their value in reducing the number of patients requiring long-term pain management and surgery. So in conclusion, osteopaths integrate effectively into a specialised multidisciplinary team environment and are able to work with increasing scope of practice. We're able to perform well in a highly demanding clinical environment. We have proven clinical effectiveness and cost effectiveness, and we're skilled at performing assessment, triage, as well as interventions, which free up our surgical and medical colleagues to carry out procedures which we can't, as non-medical practitioners, carry out. And finally, osteopaths are an integral and valuable part of the team, which is trying to tackle a growing, costly healthcare problem, not just in the UK, but across Europe. So in summary, our clinical audit demonstrates the value of osteopathy in managing and helping to manage this complex group of patients. Osteopathy is effective as a conservative intervention and can achieve significant cost benefits by reducing repeat consultations, need for medication, repeat investigations and surgery. We're able to deliver improved quality of life as well as high satisfaction ratings, and that's when compared against the complication rates of our surgical colleagues. Spinal surgery has a complication rate of approximately 12%, whereas our data shows that our complication rates are less than 1%. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, James. Before we invite questions on the floor, we're going to invite a colleague in, I believe.
Just a quick photo opportunity. Apologies.
Okay, for those who don't know why the photo, this is Charles Goerens. He's one of the most famous politicians from Luxembourg. He has very few time now. He was minister for a lot of things. And therefore, Charles, smile intensively.
Thank you very much. This is also the time that Tom is going to also leave us. So please join me in thanking Tom once again for helping sponsor and organise this Yes, please.
My name is Frank Schweizer. I'm from Germany. Last century I was here, the first Green member of the European Parliament. I'm in charge of Greenpeace, and I worked in Central Asia and the Caucasus. I'm now a former member of Parliament. But I would like to tell you a secret first. You have someone here in the European Parliament who's in love with you. Why? She's Italian. Her name is Rosa D'Amato. She's sitting there. And Rosa's dream in her life was what? To become an osteopath. She did 5 years, and then a catastrophe happened. The Italian people decided, Rosa, we need you as an MEP. She interrupted her training, and she's now here in the European Parliament, I think one of your most valuable allies in the future. And when I look in the eyes, no. Despite she's Italian, she's much more modest than me, you see. And when I said, wow, to her assistant, she said, yes, and you know, Frank, when someone in our group has problems, they all come to Rosa, and Rosa makes whatever. And therefore, in the group, she's considered as a shaman, and apparently the group is doing well. It's not my group, yeah, but therefore, I think you can be proud of her. Now, my remark, which I want to do, is through my experience as co-founder of the German Greens, being in Germany, the first Green here in the European Parliament, the first being with Greenpeace, I have a certain experience how to influence politics. And I spoke shortly already with your president. I think there are three important aspects. The first is you have to speak with one voice. Therefore, I appreciated very much what you said, either to merge your structures or to bring them together with a common body would be very, very helpful. And you were so proud of your document. I'm not. Because you said 18 yes, 14 abstentions, 1 no, which means 54% in favor. Therefore, I think it is important that you explain us why the 14 have abstained, and if all the others, the abstainers and the Bulgarians, are still behind the project, the paper, yes or no. Because we have been here 19 months in the European Parliament. The boss was Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. 110 people discussed the project of a European constitution. When it was introduced by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, he said, this paper is not the best paper in the world, because it's not what I would have written, but I think it is nevertheless the best paper in the world, because everyone in the room has agreed to this text, the compromise. When in your country you want to insult a politician, you say always, you're making compromises. He said, yes. Here, if you would say to Rosa, you are making always compromises, thank you very much, this is a nice compliment, because here the highest compliment which you can make to someone is to make compromise. Therefore, I would like to know why it hasn't worked. First thing, as I said, is to speak with one voice. And second is to have a political weight. We with Greenpeace found several ways of achieving this. But in general, it is in Brussels, to have a political weight, you have to have a representation here. Either an office or 1 or 2 persons who are coming once a month to Brussels to give your concern a face and to learn from the Chinese, because one of the Chinese top proverbs is nothing is as powerful to make a hole in granite, in stone, than the permanent drop of water. That means you have to be permanently here with 1 or 2 faces, not with an office necessarily, but with a person who has high communication skills and who knows the way here and who can address the key players. To have a political weight as well, you need to show that you represent people. And when I spoke to your president, we spoke again exactly about this. What you are doing, you are shaman, you are magician, Yes, magicians. You are taking away pain from someone. That means you have to mobilize in an intelligent way, to collect and to mobilize those where you took away the pain through your activity. And the family members. And now in our new electronic age, we have, for example, one tool, which are these petitions, online petition. To have an online petition concentrating on one country or on the whole of the European Union, to be recognized, all what we've heard earlier, to fight for it and to get the support of the individuals where you saved them from pain. And to use celebrities we have here, yeah, sports people, but there are certainly other celebrities. To mobilize them, to ask them if you can use their photos and their testimonies in your presentation. And even to think about product placing. There were long discussions years ago if it is justifiable that car companies, BMW, give their cars to James Bond in the film. But it meant the figures for sales of exactly this model increased. If it is possible to have a telenovela, a very nice, charming, wonderfully osteopath, that means, no, yes, oh, I am already a candidate for a telenovela. That means to try product placing, but in this case, placing of a wonderful representative of the osteopath community. And in addition, democracy functions, the executive body, the government, and the parliaments. In all European member states, we have petitions committees. To write a petition to the petitions committee might result to push a specific issue. Just this morning when I entered the parliament, a representative of the blind organization from Europe came to me and said, "Oh, Frank, wonderful, thank you." I said, "What?" "Yeah. Because of a petition written to the European Parliament, now there is an international convention helping the accessibility of books, taped books for blind people, and it will enter into force on the 1st of October. Why? Because blind organization asked the Petitions Committee of the European Parliament to do it, and finally this international petition is now entering into force. It took some 4 years, but there are a lot of possibilities, but you have to be aware of the figure of those people who you saved and to bring it forward, because, apologies, we are politicians, yeah, but politicians move either because of conviction or if they see that there is a considerable number of people who are potential voters who push them towards something. And therefore I wish you all the best. And this, I've learned, I thought I was intelligent, but I discovered I had no clue of your problems. I think it's a shame that you have these problems. And as I'm a friend of Björn, yeah, there are a lot of people here in Brussels, if you rely on Björn, who can assist you in your work here. Therefore, good luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those words. They were really, it will help us move in the right direction, and we've taken note of a lot of them, although I'm not sure about Gerchen. Okay, if we can now return back to you, the audience on the floor, are there any questions on the two presentations that we've had this afternoon? We've got the first one here, please.
Actually, I've got 2 questions. One's for James. Thank you for your presentation, James.
You can probably hear me without it.
fascinating outcomes coming out of the work you're doing there. Has that had any impact on the behaviour of the people who commission treatments in the environment in which you work?
Funding for healthcare has never been tighter in the UK than it is at present. There are significant pressures on spending within the NHS, both at primary care level and at secondary care level. And one of the things that is happening, has happened recently certainly within our hospital, is that the commissioners of services are asking all the service providers within the hospital to justify their position. And we have to justify our position based on clinical effectiveness and cost effectiveness. And we are in somewhat of a unique position as the osteopathic team within the hospital that we have this sort of data. Our physiotherapy colleagues don't have it, and a lot of our surgical colleagues don't have it. They certainly don't have it as a service, they may have it as individual clinicians. So we are already in a much stronger position than our other colleagues just within the spinal unit alone, because we already have data which demonstrates financial and clinical effectiveness.
My second question was to actually ask Raymond Engel if he would be willing to make some observations about some of the work that's being done in OSEAN to try and drive the standards of education to the CEN level. I wonder if you'd be prepared to comment.
Thank you for the question, Michael. Gerken has already mentioned before that OSEAN have taken up the European norm and have said there is one part that refers to the general practice of osteopathy, and it's within the scope of what EFO and FOR are doing to see that the practice gets up to standard. But there is an important chapter that refers to education. And actually, if I remember our meetings and our discussions, this is also what took us much more time and where we had to go into much more detail, because there's more diversity in education. So what OSEAN decided early on was to oblige all our members. We currently got, I think, 32 member schools across Europe, to oblige all our members to undergo an audit according to the standard. We think the standard is good in medical terms, in osteopathic terms. We thought it was a bit lacking as far as business, the business aspects of a company, of a school are concerned. So we added a second document, and together with Austrian standards, we developed an audit process that we have started to roll out since last year, and we are currently auditing all OSEAN schools. So far, we've done the first third of our members, and we hope to finish all our member schools until 2007, at the end of 2017. So far, we found that none of the schools was perfect, but they all had some minor deviations, some things that could be corrected within a couple of weeks or within a few months after the audit. But we find it's a very useful exercise as a test for the schools, but also it's a test for the standard and to see what works well in a real-life audit. So our experience is very good. We have already seen some of the schools raising their standards because of this document that was created.
Thank you very much. Comment on this question. This morning I met Raymond at breakfast, and we kind of discussed this already. And I'd like to said the document is just the start of it. The hard work will be now, just what to do with the document. And I think, as we all know, the document should be revised in 5 years' time. And we've already lost 1 year, we've already 1 year, something like it's passed. So I think what we should do, and I'm addressing everybody, is to think of coming together again and working on the revision of this document. And having said that, this document contains practically two cases. is one which has to do with education, and the other one is with osteopathic services. And they shouldn't be in one document. So what I would like to propose is that we set up a new committee somewhere along the line and talk about the educational pillar and the osteopathic pillar. Because we need a new document in something like 4 years. So that's what I'd like to ask. Thank you.
Next question is, no, there's one before him.
Thank you.
And then,
Just a comment and an observation from a conference in America that in fact Maurice and I were at on behalf of the Institute of Osteopathy. We actually met with the American Osteopathic Association chief exec and discussed the idea of looking at patient advocacy as a method of actually boosting political support. I think that's kind of been alluded to just before. And it was very interesting because in fact they did a test pilot of 17,000 osteopaths out of 123,000, so it's not quite 10% of the profession in the United States. They got 3,000 responses from osteopaths, and they had 2,000 patients who became, if you like, advocate group to start working with across the states in a small chosen area. This is something that we're going to be exploring with them because we want to learn from that experience, and I think politically the patient mouth is a very good, strong selling point for osteopathy. In fact, the man who was speaking, the MEP, is an MEP, but he's also a patient and a human being like we all are, and yet, okay, he has a position that these people who have patients are very powerful, I think, for us to utilise. So that's something just as an observation. And a question for James, if I may, just for a second. James, how do you see the best way of disseminating the information that you've shown us, which is wonderful and exciting and thrilling to hear some good news about osteopathy, as much as the Southern Standard is good news for osteopathy? How do you actually see the best utilisation of what you have now discovered to permeate it into the outside world?
So as I said before, we've already published 3 papers on this in high-profile journals. I think it's important that when we have this kind of evidence, that there's no point in publishing in osteopathic journals because we're only preaching to the converted. We need to be putting our evidence into high-profile journals which reach the kind of audience that we're trying to reach. The last paper that we published earlier this year in the European Spine Journal was specifically a paper on the feasibility of carrying out this kind of research in order to demonstrate that the techniques that we're using to collect data and record and analyse data are robust enough to stand up to scrutiny. And once they're published in a high-profile peer-reviewed journal, you can be sure that we're doing that. And we know that over 90% of our data forms which you submit to patients are returned. So that's an incredibly high number, which means that we have an accurate reflection of how our patients are doing. If we were only getting 50% of the forms back, what is happening to the other 50% of your patients? Are we cherry picking? Well, we're not. We collect data on every patient who comes in, and 93–94% of those forms are returned to us. So
how would you use that to best effect?
So we've established that our collection process is robust. We're now busy writing a paper on this specific data, which we will then publish again in a high-profile journal, hopefully such as the European Spine Journal. And then it's up to the profession to start to use this data to go out and start to make the case for osteopathy being used in different clinical contexts. But as a profession, we have to be collecting data. Everybody who treats patients should be recording the outcomes of the treatment, should be going onto a central registry.
And are there any blocks then amongst the why you see maybe there's blocks in the profession not contributing towards this collection of data?
I think historically we've not been a confident profession in terms of analysing what we do and how well we do it. I think maybe there's a little bit of fear about really evaluating ourselves critically, and we've got to get past that. We've got to, if we want to be able to stand up and be counted, we've got to be able to demonstrate that we are effective in what we do. And the only way you can do that is by capturing data of the outcomes of your treatment. And hiding behind the osteopathy is difficult to research, I don't have time to do it, my patients don't like filling in forms. Those are not reasonable excuses, they're not acceptable excuses, and we've got to get past that. So as leaders within the profession, we should be out there hammering away at clinicians who are on the ground and making sure that everybody is capturing real-life clinical data.
document has its merits, but I presume that for many reasons, as John said, there should be a continuous dynamic process, and in most of our countries, and certainly in Belgium, there are 4 criteria to accept a treatment as a standard and have a possibility of reimbursement from society or security. It should be evidence-based, it should regard serious illness and no lateral problem. It should have a regional ratio between cost and result, and it should have little or moderate influence on the total budget. If Oren and Diego would agree that this should be a next step in the SEN document to show with analysis and data these points where every government is looking for accepting a therapy or medicine in the normal healthcare business. So I hope this will be one of the leading points in the setting of further SEN development.
I can answer that question or the remark. I think we will. If you're okay with it, I will call you or write you. So you can make sure you're on the committee and you can do your contribution on this part. Is that okay? Good deal?
Yes. We already making that kind of study in Belgium for the moment, and we invested a lot of money in it. But I heard from the UK that they are keen to help us in next studies. So
Okay.
thank you.
I'll remember your name later. Good.
Good. Any other questions from the floor? Okay, we have one here from Marika.
This is to you, James. Thank you for your presentation. One question is, could you suggest some kind of tool to collect the data, or how could people, put in the data?
We use the specific tools that we use because we work in a spinal unit and we're dealing exclusively with spinal pain. So we use tools that are tailored to collecting data about outcomes from spinal treatment. There are tools for hips, knees, shoulders, for almost every part of the body you can imagine there is a data collection tool. It's about just finding the tool and collecting it. So Google is a good place to start. But really important tools are tools like COMI and EQ5D, which are not specific to a part of the body. They collect data about how your treatment has impacted on the patient's quality of life and how they're able to carry out activities of normal daily living compared with what they were able to do before treatment. So, there are tools that are available. There are tools that are generic to treatment, and there are tools that are specific to parts of the body, and it's about understanding what kind of data you want to collect.
And my second question, right, UK being a legislated country, osteopathy legislated, do you feel that you have a better working relation with other medical participants? Or?
I suppose there are two questions that answer, two answers to that question rather. In terms of primary care, osteopaths are primary care practitioners in the UK, so patients can self-refer directly to osteopaths, and osteopaths are trusted to properly diagnose and manage patients' care, but also understand the scope of practice. So when something is beyond their scope, to know when to refer on, that's important. And that certainly happens in the UK. And I know in my own primary care practice, I would often have local GPs phoning me to ask advice on how to manage patients or what to do with patients. So I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that osteopaths can work in that kind of environment if they work in a regulated and properly trained sort of way. In secondary care, as I say, we work in a multidisciplinary team with spine surgeons, physios, pain management consultants, and we work as peers. We are not told what to do. We're not looked down upon. We work as colleagues, and we seek one another's opinions, and we are interested in one another's opinions, and that goes in both directions. And I think having a properly regulated environment breeds that kind of confidence and allows that kind of relationship to develop.
Good, thank you very much. Tim Walker.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment, very much welcoming our guest from Germany's comments earlier on in the session, and to talk about the number of countries that abstained on the standard. I think
I was just briefed on this. I know what the answer is. That we are terrible polite osteopaths, because I just learned those countries where you don't have osteopaths, they abstain.
Yeah, I think when we started, we thought there would be a lot more opposition. So I think it was a credit to the work that was done in a number of countries, and I particularly mentioned France, for example, where we started thinking they might oppose a standard. But I think it was the unity of the people in the room that actually helped take that forward. And then a comment on how we might revise the standard going forward. It makes me feel slightly old that we have to look at it again, and I still recall the temperature of -14 the day we started in Brussels, the day we started, and I hope it's not as cold next time. But I think we need to, across Europe, think about whether we are ensuring that the standards are enforced at the level that they are universally, as much as we need to think about raising the bar even higher. So there is a debate, I think, still to be had about that, but I think we should be ambitious in both areas, both for the acceptance and the improvement.
Thank you very much. Brent, please.
I would also like to comment on what has been said before, and this time on the topic of product placement in movies. I think this is an excellent idea, but in fact, osteopathy has been doing that, and in 2 James Bond movies, James Bond is seeing an osteopath, and in the latest movie, he is referred to craniosacral therapy when he enters this.
But then why haven't you put this sequence on your website? Or mentioning James Bond because of us?
Well, there is these copyright issues. But yes, it's great if we can manage that. Ian Fleming was treated by an osteopath regularly. That's why we sneaked our way into that.
But this information has to be on your general website. Fleming and all the James Bonds love osteopaths. Look, that film. We can't show it on our website because of copyright.
Very good, thank you, Brent. Boris Chang had a question.
I think I'm going to follow that. Sorry, a much more prosaic statement, which basically that referring to the tool set one can use for collecting data. The collaboration of the UK osteopathic institutions have come together to set up and fund an app for patients to report their outcome measures. It's called the Proms tool, GEOSC and we at the IO and the colleges all banded together to produce this through ΕΝ16686, the research centre. It's a platform that is obviously infinitely usable in any language or in any culture. So if you're interested, come and talk to us. And there's no James Bond.
Thank you very much, Morris. Tim Dalmont.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for James for his presentation, because it was something that I love to see. And James, I would like to have your telephone number. It doesn't mean anything. It's great what you did. This kind of research should be around much more. On the other hand, I was happy this was already said. You stole a little bit my question or my appeal I would have loved to make. Indeed, is an appeal that not just only educations, I'm an educator, should be responsible for scientific research or outcomes to prove that a profession has a reason to exist. But there are many, many, many professional organizations in osteopathy, almost as many as there are osteopaths. And it would be a great idea, and I'm happy that GEOSC is happy to share that, to have a tool in forms of an app is even better. That's what the doctors actually are using, the medical doctors,
to record this patient satisfaction or even effectiveness of what we do. That could be of great help, and it would take the burden of scientific research away from the schools on that perspective. And I think it would be very, very worthwhile also for professional organizations to then defend what we do. But again, James, don't run away, because I really want to talk about this spinal research you did, as I myself am very much into discal research. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, Mark.
Another question to James. How do you think, how good is this available, this data collecting you are making in your hospital for private osteopaths? For example, if ask all members to send it to their members and they are working privately as osteopaths, is it actually educate? Can we use that as well privately as private osteopaths?
I think, as Maurice just said, there is an app available, and it couldn't be easier. You have an iPad or a palm top computer which you hand to a patient. They touch some buttons. The information is instantly uploaded to a registry. It's just about having the will to do it. And I think, as I say, we have to stop making excuses for not doing this and start getting on and doing it. The technology exists. The app exists. It's been used in the UK, and there are already hundreds of data sets uploaded onto a registry in the UK. There are hundreds and thousands of osteopathic interventions occurring across Europe every week. If we could capture 10% of them, how quickly would we have a huge database which would demonstrate our effectiveness? Stop dithering and making excuses and start to get on with it. It's there.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions for James or on the standard itself? Yes, please, Thomas.
Thank you, James, for a good presentation. We have already asked you to come to Norway, so you will be there in a few weeks presenting this to our members, and that is great. Back to the SEN a bit, and this standard to be revised on sometime in the future. When working with the SEN document, it is a healthcare provision which is standardized, the level of that provision. But it has to a great extent been, the standard has been set by educational standards for the ones delivering this service. For those of us not working in countries yet regulated, it has been a good quality of the standard to also include quite a lot information about educational needs. So in our work towards regulation, it has been a good document to use as a reference point, both for regulatory matters, but also for raising the awareness of the quality of standards within education. So for us at the moment, it has been working good with education being included to such extent in the document. So that's just an idea to carry on for further revisions and further meetings and talks. And also to bear in mind that we have started with this reference material to work towards regulation. And if we change it a lot, we also need to change that process working towards regulation. So it has implications in different directions. But of course, we will also be happy to be part of a future revision and to get involved in that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Any other questions? Yes, please, Tim.
I don't want to talk in name of OSIN, but we have started, or OSIN has started, with auditing schools based on the standard. So as said, the norm actually talks about two big parts: the professional organization organisation of osteopathy and the organisation of education. Now, from the part of the schools, we started to implement this document on already a auditing and controlling level, with the possibility of being excluded as being a standardised school for Ocean if you don't meet the standard. Now, my question is to the regulators who regulate the field, how are you going to use this document that you actually funded to apply it on your members? And your members are your professional organizations in different countries, but also the osteopaths indirectly in these countries.
Well, I'm going to let you in a little secret to ask this question. We've already looked into this, and we are working on a validation system, just as you asked for, but we are working on it. We have explored possibilities and what to validate and what not. And it should not be just validation because of validation. No, it should raise the bar of the osteopath. So we are looking into it. We have had 3 meetings with the Standardization Institute, who can provide the training of the auditors. So what we are looking at, the 4th, is some kind of the same model as Ocean used for the schools. We're planning to use for the individual osteopath. Is that answering your question? Only this was to be made public on the next 4 meeting in Cyprus. So thank you very much then. But yes, we're working on it. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, and sorry for being party pooper.
Thank you.
And just to add further to Nick,
Yes, I think there's an interesting conundrum here, which is that we have agreed the SEN standard in Europe, and that's particularly helpful in countries where osteopathy isn't regulated. What we wouldn't want to move to is a position where all the countries were regulated, but then to their own and different standards. So I think there needs to be probably more cooperation between the competent authorities of Europe, thinking about standards and looking at SEN as a reference point. At the moment, the formal cooperation between competent authorities is very limited. We are in contact, for example, with colleagues in Portugal and in France, but the discussions are at a very early stage. And of course, we do stupid things in the UK, so we might not be part of that process, which is a matter of some regrets. But yes, I think we need to be doing more where there are competent authorities and to seek that alignment.
thank you very much, Tim. Louis,
First of all, we would like to thank the organizers of this event. It's been very productive, even before it started, so thank you very much. The second thing, we are very glad of having science on the table. And we heard at least twice today the word shaman and the word the magic man or something like that. We should definitely get rid of it. We should talk about science, research, osteopathy, and nothing else. That's the first thing. My second question, it's about the SEN document and the audit process of the schools. Jan, you said that you've already had 3 meetings and you're organizing a group of auditors of schools. My question is very simple. As the SEN standard, it's based on external control of things, in that case, schools, professionals, etc. Are the auditors, do the auditors have any relationship at all with the schools?
But you confuse probably 2 things. I wasn't speaking about auditing schools. When you talk about auditing schools, you need to go to Raymond and the Standardization Institute. When you're talking about when I was answering the question of Tim, it's about the individual osteopath. And if you audit something, you shouldn't do it yourself. You should have no legal ties whatsoever. The auditor should be independent and should be audited on an independent basis, and not with people who have ties to schools or whatsoever.
I make the question other way around.
Yeah.
can a member of a school audit another school?
That's more for Ocean, I suppose.
We did have 2 workshops where Austrian Standard trained auditors. Now we have a team of probably 15 to 20 active auditors, and one of the criteria for the selection was that these people have at least some experience in the management of an osteopathic institution. Austrian Standards as an institution has the oversight of the audits, and if a school approaches them, they will then select auditors. So if you run a school, you apply for an audit, they will select people, and that among these auditors, there might be someone who works on another school, but there might be someone like Simon Fielding here or Marika Yevprat, who is currently not active in another school.
So the answer is yes?
And she's yes, this is possible.
Isn't it also possible that if you're being presented with an audit team, if you don't want a certain person to come, you can say, I don't want that person because this or that?
Yes, there is. Of course, we will not send an auditor from another school next door. There are rules where we respect that there are certain conflicts that must not turn up.
So, because on my point of view, if you are members of the same organization as OSIM, and you control yourself, at some point this is not external control at all, because it's the same organization controlling itself.
It is not OSIAN controlling itself, it's Austrian Standards doing the audits, and they are supervising it. But we found that having first-hand experience on how a school is run is essential to be able to judge what's going on in a school.
We've got a question over here. Patrick.
I'd just like to thank everyone for their presentations today and the information presented. My question is a sort of a general one around, given that the event has happened, and I'm just wondering what are the means of publication and publicity from a European Parliament point of view? How do these kinds of events get publicised at a European level? I know we can all go back to our own countries and write up our own newsletters and do our own piece, but I'm just wondering, is there an established format in the European Parliament? Is there a way that these type of events tend to get processed and the information used as to what they stand for, what happened in them, what the outcomes might be, if they're going to lead on to something else? Is there an established procedure or established system for public information?
Okay, thank you for the question, and my newfound friend Frank here will answer the question.
The answer is very, very simple. No. Why? I arrived here 32 years ago, and since then I've observed that we have a lot of wonderful rooms. This is one of the smallest medium-sized rooms. And the parliamentarians always thought that civil society can come and use these rooms. That means we are, besides being a parliament, a sort of conference center for issues linked to issues which we discussed. There are posters hanging, everyone is invited, but an ordinary member of parliament gets 300, 400 emails a day, and every day you could choose like a child in front of a television, different channels, hear different meetings. Therefore, it is totally normal that the turnout is quite low. But it's important for you that you have the feeling we have been received in the European Parliament, that you transmit it via your communication channels, and that you can use it, and even if you're dealing with your Brussels-based stakeholders, we had this meeting in the European Parliament, you weren't there, but possibly next time you might come. But the Parliament itself will not receive minutes of this meeting. It is, you are here because the room is free, sometimes you have even interpreters free. It is a place instead of a hotel. And it is very, 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 very difficult to mobilize a lot of people to come to these meetings. Therefore, you can be happy that you had here 3 MEPs. That is already good. I've seen conferences with 0 MEPs. But it means that for the next one, those contacts you have, that your national associations contact people who you know in Brussels and inform them, sort of snowball system to attract them to the next meeting here. And therefore I propose to you, come here once a year, every 2 years, for a meeting here. Because this, and then be a little bit earlier, some of you a little bit later, to address in individual bilateral meetings either policymakers or civil servants in the European Union institution. And the very last is, when you are a member of the European Union, you have 3 embassies in Brussels. One, the embassy for Belgium. Germany, we have, I think, 5 or 6 diplomats. The embassy towards NATO, the mission to NATO it's called, and they're about 60 military and civilian. And then Germany has an EU permanent representation with more than 150 staff. Even Luxembourg have about 110 staff in their permanent representation. And there is one person responsible for health, sent by the national ministry which is dealing with health. And these 28 health responsibles of the 28 member states are meeting in the permanent representations. It means when you're coming next time, it might be productive that the 3 Italians who are here would have gone to the permanent representation of Italy to speak with the representative from the health structure from Italy who is sitting, and sometimes it's even 2 or 3. But these are all things which are coming over the time. But what I've seen over the years, when you use this year as a space for meeting with some few and then always more and more, and then it's becoming a part of your own identity, our annual or biannual conference in Brussels. And it is, last point, much, much more easy than in a national context to get your contact in Brussels with representatives from your own country and representatives from the European Union. Much, much more easy. Despite prejudices that it might be more difficult. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did Thomas have a question?
I would like slightly to go back to what I was talking about auditing osteopaths individually. The SEN document with other documents, other material, forms a basis for applications for regulations among Europe. And the individual audit is, for me, regulation. In UK you have TOC, in other countries you have other regulatory bodies, very often strongly connected to the established health services or the governmental part of it. So for the northern part of Europe, Scandinavia, our aim is that we will be included in the regulatory mechanism already established by the government, takes care of doctors, physios, nurses and so on. And then it will be an individually check of any osteopath. And that is a non-biased check because they have nothing to do with any osteopathic association and so on. So for us the SEN document has a great value in that process. So when we have discussed this, we have not really seen the need for establishing an auditing mechanism or a kind of certificate that would sort of fit all over Europe. That can that would be my sort of answer, a solution for your question, Lou. But we need it to be the regulatory bodies nationally to do the individual check of any hospital.
Thomas, I think that most of the osteopathic organisations in Europe incorporate through FOR and EFO. If they don't already have regulation, their goal is to achieve regulation. But equally, we know that that's not going to be possible in some countries, or it's been said that it was so far in the future as to be not a question of relevance. To me, then, the purpose of the SEN standard is about making a clear delineation between a responsible body of osteopathic opinion within a country and a non-responsible, for those who believe you can adopt the title with minimum of training, etc., and to give that delineation. I remember that throughout the discussions on the document and at SEN and in the 4 meetings that I attended, I don't think we ever thought that the SEN document would be used to accredit an individual osteopath, because that would probably be too expensive for an individual. It might be possible to apply it in a large practice. In some countries, people are growing practices. If you had 6, 10 osteopaths working together, you might accredit the practice. I think there's an area that people haven't looked at, which is the professional association within a country might seek accreditation. And in turn, it be a condition of membership of that association that you have the appropriate training standards and practice standards. So you could have a SEN accredited professional body meeting this standard. I don't think anyone has explored that, but to me, in a non-regulated country, that would be an important step to take.
Yes, please. Afternoon. My question is about type 2 educational way of becoming an osteopath. As you know, we have some problems in Spain with that, because SEN document is talking about 4 years type 2 formation, but there are several schools in there that they are starting to do this kind of formation in 2 years. And I know it's not a very easy question to me to do, but as I assume, the SEN document should contemplate type 2 in 2 years formation, in 2 years time formation.
I remember this was a particularly difficult discussion in the both in the technical committee and the drafting group. And on page 14 of the document, which I have in front of me, fortunately, it says that a typical type 2 program would take 2,000 hours over a minimum of 4 years, including supervised clinical practice and training. And that, I seem to remember, was, to use our German friend's word, a compromise position, which was that it was seen to be acceptable that you could have this accelerated program, but normally one would expect it to be 4 years, but it was not mandatory that it had to be. And that was one of the compromises, or as I prefer to call them, accommodations, where some people had to agree that it was not perfect for them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more questions? No, in which case I'll pass the floor back to the chair before we wrap up.
Thank you. There's some last words I want to say. Is it a perfect document? Far from. But it is a document. And we have a document. And we agreed on what's written not about tomorrow, it's about the future. And I think that's what we all should keep in mind, that it's not, maybe not for us, for the older one, but it's for the ones who come after us. And if we don't make sure we have founded a solid basement, a solid structure in place, it will not happen. So, please, make the contribution. You're a member of an organization. Being a member, maybe being a board member, comes with obligations. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gert-Jan. So, in conclusion, when we set out at the start of this journey, we had three main aims, as Gert-Jan was saying earlier on, which were to initiate and complete SEND project, to work with other osteopathic organisations to identify appropriate research streams, and to begin to develop an evidence base for osteopathy. And as you can see, we are progressing quite nicely on all these three aims. EFO and 4 are continuing to work ever more closely together so that we do endeavour to speak with one voice, because this is absolutely crucial. And this was truly a joint adventure that worked exceptionally well for the two organisations. We have to thank OCN for their input at the end, which again was most invaluable. But I would like to especially thank you all here today, because I saw many of you attend these technical meetings and spend hours deliberating on different terminology, making these compromises, making these sacrifices, lobbying your own parliamentarians in your own country to make this standard a reality. So a huge thank you goes to all of you here today. And I think you can all give yourself a round of applause, because this really is the first time that we are all here today with something definitive for osteopathy. So thank you very much.
First of all, I'd like to thank all the participants. I think it's wonderful that so many of you have come from all over Europe and are so enthusiastic. Now, we can stay in the room for still some time, but Christophe, who let you in, he will be coming, and he is willing to give you a tour of the European Parliament for those who are interested. And after that, you know, outside of the plastics from Woo, many of us will go for a drink to finish off today. But we're not in a rush, so we can just